So, freshman Congressman Michael Baumgartner, a Republican from Washington's 5th District who took office just about a year ago, decided to use one of his first major committee appearances to lecture Jack Smith about the rule of law, while simultaneously revealing he didn't even know who Jack Smith was until his chairman told him. He doesn't watch cable news because he's busy with Netflix. Good job. He accused the former special counsel of being a politically motivated prosecutor hell-bent on influencing the 2024 election based on timing that he, a man who literally said, "I was not real familiar with this issue," has now apparently become an expert on after what appears to have been a weekend of independent research. It's the kind of performance that would be almost endearing in its transparency if it weren't about something this serious. Baumgartner concluded his questioning by comparing Smith to an unnamed U.S. major who destroyed a Vietnamese village to save it, telling Smith that history will remember your name as someone who helped destroy the rule of law. So, before we get into what's wrong with every single thing Baumgartner just said, let me show you what actually happened at this hearing. After you watch the video, I'll give you my take at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, 5 hours later, here we are. One of the benefits of being a freshman member of this committee with the least amount of seniority is you get the benefit of getting everybody else listen to them talk first. I'm going to start by saying that starting out, I was not real familiar with this issue. In fact, when chairman of the committee told me we had Jack Smith coming in, my first response privately was, "Who's Jack Smith?" And I say that because my wife and I have 5 young children. We don't have cable television, and by the time we get them to bed, we're either watching Netflix or better yet, reading books. So when I came to this, I wanted to take a real honest look at what had happened. And I should also say that, a little about what I think happened on January 6th. I think, like most Americans, think Donald Trump was cruising to re-election in 2019 with the booming economy, and then COVID happened, George Floyd happened, a lot of things got changed. But I do think in those circumstances that Joe Biden won that election. I also think, like most Americans, that January 6th was a terrible attack. I think it was a terrible riot. I don't believe it was an insurrection determined to overthrow the government, but I think it was an important day for America. I also think, like most Americans, it was extremely unfortunate for this country that the January 6th committee was a partisan event, and there was not an ability to put folks from both sides of their choosing on that committee so there could have been a full and honest debate for the American people. I think it was politically motivated, what Nancy Pelosi did with that committee. And so when I came to this issue with a fresh look, with those kind of my priors and what I got into, what I wanted to find was that in the goodness of the rule of law, that you as an investigator carried this out to the highest ideals, that it was not a politically motivated investigation. And I think a lot about that in the 250th anniversary of America. And I think about what the framers would have thought of this and the state of the rule of law, what makes America special with checks and balances, what keeps us from being a banana republic. But what I was disappointed to find when I looked into this issue and how you conducted the investigation was that it was a politically motivated investigation determined to influence the election in 2024. And I say that, and the thing I cannot get around as I look into this is the timing that you fought for in when the court cases would be held. Now, to my understanding, the Department of Justice says you're not supposed to have politically motivated timing of a court case. But when I look at the timing that you pushed for and the jurisdictions between New York and Florida, and with all the other things that President Trump was engaged in, that looks very politically motivated to me, and I think to the American people as they take a look at this issue to try to influence the election. So that's where I come down after today's hearing, my own independent investigation, and your commentary. I sincerely hope that conclusion is incorrect, but that's the conclusion I come to. And I think when most people, if they look through this not through a partisan lens, I think they'll come to, they will not be able to get around the fact of how you timed these elections. I think that's really to the detriment of the American Republic and for where we sit today as a country. And so my one question for you, Jack Smith, is are you familiar with the Vietnamese city of Bến Tre?
I am not.
Well, Bến Tre was the site of an intense firefight in early 1968. And after that intense firefight that destroyed the town, a reporter from the Associated Press interviewed a U.S. major. And he said it became necessary to destroy the village in order to save it. Now, historians do not know what was the name of that U.S. major, but I think when they look back at your engagement with our democracy in this republic, they will remember your name. And when it comes to the rule of law that is the foundation of this country, they will remember someone who helped destroy the rule of law. And with that, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Okay, so he just admits he didn't know who Jack Smith was, and then immediately claims to have conducted an investigation that uncovered political motivations. The audacity. But what Baumgartner doesn't want you to know, what he's counting on you not knowing, is that his entire argument about timing collapses under the slightest scrutiny. So let me give you the information he either doesn't have or chose to ignore. Jack Smith was appointed special counsel in November 2022. The classified documents indictment came down on June 8, 2023. The January 6th election interference indictment came on August 1st, 2023. Now, Baumgartner claims this timing was designed to influence the election in 2024. So let's do some basic math that apparently wasn't part of his independent investigation. The Iowa caucuses. The first actual voting in the 2024 Republican primary took place on January 15, 2024. That's more than 7 months after the June indictment and more than 5 months after the August indictment. To put that in perspective, Smith indicted Trump more than 165 days before the first Republican primary votes were cast. Here's what the Department of Justice actually says about election year timing. I searched for this because, unlike Baumgartner, I don't just go with my gut after watching Netflix. According to a 2018 DOJ Inspector General report, there is no written 60-day rule prohibiting prosecutions near elections. What exists is guidance that prosecutors may never select the timing of investigative steps or criminal charges for the purpose of affecting any election. The DOJ's own policy, confirmed by legal experts quoted by CNN in 2024, makes clear this applies to new indictments brought within 60 to 90 days of an election, not trials or proceedings after someone has already been charged. Former federal prosecutor Jessica Roth, now a professor at Cardozo Law School, explained in an ABC News report that Smith's indictments were filed well outside this window, long before any presidential primary election, and that there is no automatic pause simply because a defendant is engaged in a political campaign. In fact, she noted, once charges are filed, the Federal Speedy Trial Act requires cases proceed on a schedule set by the court. So when Baumgartner says he cannot get around the timing, what he's really saying is, I cannot get around the fact that a prosecutor brought charges against a candidate 7 months before any votes were cast, and then the candidate himself delayed the proceedings to push them closer to the election. Because that's what actually happened. According to reporting from NPR, Smith actively pushed for speedy trials, while Trump's legal team filed motion after motion for delays. But here's the part that really exposes the bad faith of Baumgartner's argument. He mentions the jurisdictions between New York and Florida, as if Smith chose them for political reasons. Smith didn't choose these jurisdictions. The alleged crimes determined them. The classified documents case is in Florida because that's where Mar-a-Lago is, where the documents were illegally retained. The January 6th case is in Washington, D.C., because that's where the alleged conspiracy to overturn the election took place. Federal law requires cases be brought where the crimes occurred. And as for the New York reference, that's not even Smith's case. Baumgartner is apparently conflating Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's state case with the federal cases, which tells you exactly how thorough his independent investigation actually was. What Smith actually testified at this very hearing, and what Baumgartner conveniently ignored, Smith told lawmakers, "Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in criminal activity. If asked whether to prosecute a former president based on the same facts today, I would do so regardless of whether that president was a Democrat or a Republican." Al Jazeera reported that Smith emphasized, "I made my decisions without regard to President Trump's political association, activities, beliefs, or candidacy in the 2024 election." The reality is that Smith's investigation was reviewed by the DOJ's Public Integrity Section, the very office that exists to ensure political impartiality. Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin pointed out that Special Counsel Smith, you pursued the facts. You followed every applicable law, ethics rule, and DOJ regulation. Your decisions were reviewed by the Public Integrity Section. So what does this actually mean? Not what does Baumgartner want you to think it means, but what does it actually mean? On a personal level, It means that a congressman just used his platform to legitimize the conspiracy theory that investigating crimes is political persecution, as long as the person who committed the crimes is running for office. Think about what that precedent establishes. If timing an indictment 7 months before an election is political, then any candidate can commit any crime and simply announce their candidacy to create an immunity shield, which ironically is exactly what Trump tried to argue in court and lost. On an institutional level, what Baumgartner is doing here is deliberate. He's working to discredit the rule of law itself. According to reporting on the hearing from multiple outlets, Smith repeatedly stated that Trump was the most culpable and most responsible person in the conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election, that proof beyond a reasonable doubt existed, and that the attack on the Capitol would not have happened except for Trump. By framing Smith, a career prosecutor who worked at The Hague prosecuting war criminals, as politically motivated, Baumgartner is telling the public that following evidence is partisan. Baumgartner says this investigation damaged the Republic. But Smith was investigating an actual attempt to overturn an election, the thing Baumgartner claims to care about. The indictment detailed a scheme involving fake electors, pressure on state officials to find votes, and a plot to have the vice president reject certified electoral votes. That's not a political disagreement. That's, according to the indictment and Smith's investigation, criminal conduct designed to nullify your vote. But Baumgartner wants you focused on when Smith brought charges, not why. He wants you outraged about prosecutorial timing, which, as we've established, doesn't hold up. Not about the conduct being prosecuted. It's misdirection, and it's deliberate. At the end of his remarks, Baumgartner told Smith that when history looks back, it will remember Smith as someone who helped destroy the rule of law by prosecuting Trump. But here's what history will actually remember. Jack Smith brought meticulously documented federal indictments against a former president for allegedly stealing classified documents and allegedly conspiring to overturn an election. Those cases were reviewed by the Public Integrity Section. They were supported by grand juries. And they were proceeding through the courts until Trump won the 2024 election, and DOJ policy required their dismissal. History will also remember this. A congressman who admitted he didn't know who Jack Smith was, who doesn't watch the news, who conducted what he calls an independent investigation between bedtime stories and streaming sessions, compared a career prosecutor to an unnamed military officer who destroyed a village to save it. He offered no evidence of political motivation beyond timing that doesn't hold up to basic scrutiny. He conflated separate cases. He ignored the actual DOJ policies. And he did it all while wrapping himself in concern for the rule of law. This isn't about protecting the Republic. This is about protecting one man. And Baumgartner just proved it by telling us he didn't even know who Smith was and then deciding that didn't matter. If you value clear facts, real timelines, and accountability over political theater, make sure you don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now to support independent, research-driven coverage that cuts through the spin and shows you what actually happened. Hit like, follow, and share this video so more people can see the truth for themselves.